Chris Wyatt became a member of the OPP in 1980 and currently holds the rank of superintendent. In September 2006, Chris was appointed to the role of Chief Firearms Officer for Ontario. Over the course of his career, he's held a number of senior appointments, including Commander, First Nations and Contract Policing Bureau, Commander, Operational Policy and Support Bureau, Commanding Officer, Provincial Police Academy, and Director of Central Region Headquarters. Chris is the holder of the Police Order of Merit, the Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal, and the Police Exemplary Service Medal. He's a graduate of U of T with a Bachelor of Science. Superintendent Wyatt is also a member of both the Canadian and Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police and has been a member of the Rotary Club of Barrie since 1998. OFH works very closely with Chris and his staff on a number of firearms issues, and over the years we've developed not only a strong working relationship, but I also believe a good friendship based upon mutual respect, even when we agree to disagree on an issue. We're very pleased that he's made the jaunt to come down and join us today, so please join me in welcoming the Chief Firearms Officer of Ontario, Superintendent Chris Wyatt.
Well, thanks very much, Greg, for that nice introduction. I don't always get such a good introduction, sometimes not very good at all. As Greg mentioned, we do have a really good relationship between the Chief Firearms Office and OFA, and we meet 3 or 4 times a year to discuss issues. And I think I'd say we have friendships, like myself, Dave Wall, Bill Blackwell, Greg Front, Dave Pinn, Angelo Lombardo. And like we don't agree on every issue, right? Like I couldn't convince them that they should support the long gun registry, but you know that's in the past. I've been an OPP officer for quite a long time, and I started off patrolling the 401 out here when it was like a dusty road. And I come from a small town in eastern Ontario, Brockville. I got a kind of a culture shock when they sent me to Toronto to patrol the 401. I'd never seen on a highway with more than 4 lanes before. So anyways, they sent me to this incident where a car had been abandoned on the Hogs Hollow Bridge. Now, if you don't know where that is, there's a bridge on the 401 between Avenue Road and Yonge Street. You don't even know you're on a bridge. It's a valley below it. But anyways, this unfortunate American, his car broke down there, and he thought he was going to hop over the guardrail to get to the side of the road. And unfortunately, he didn't look before he leapt, and he fell 10 stories down to the Don Valley Golf Course. And he was found the next day by a couple of golfers. I think you're actually allowed relief from that with the balls too close to a body. So I had done the call, but just to get to the point about how police are. So the Toronto police, they look at this and they think, well, this should be investigated by the OPP because he came from up on that bridge, right? Now, police, they like to sort of avoid work wherever they can. So the Toronto sergeant, he calls the OPP sergeant and saying, this is your investigation. And the OPP sergeant, no, he's in your area, right? And he says, no, he left, he jumped off your bridge. And the OPP sergeant said, well, when he left our area, he was alive. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Chief Firearms Office. Our mandate is really the protection of public safety and administering the licensing provisions of the Firearms Act. And I'm appointed by the Minister of Community Safety, the provincial minister. And then I designate all the other firearms officers in Ontario. And public safety is a fundamental principle on which every decision regarding licensing is made. And we work with partners like OFA and police agencies and M&R to make sure that legal firearms don't become illegal, because they all start off as legal firearms. And here's what we do. We issue or refuse to issue, renew or revoke firearms licenses for businesses and individuals. And we also issue authorizations to transport restricted and prohibited firearms, so that anytime you want to move your handgun, hopefully, and I'm sure there's a few handgun owners here, they have an authorization to do that before they move it. We also approve all the shooting ranges in Ontario, and we approve the transfer of restricted and prohibited firearms between individuals and businesses. And lastly, I designate all the Canadian Firearms Safety Course instructors in the province of Ontario. And I'm just going to show you some key stats here. There's about 530,000 firearms licensees in Ontario and about 1.8 million in the country. Now, while we had the long gun registry, we kind of had an idea how many non-restricted firearms. Before it was eliminated, we knew there was over 2 million registered long guns in Ontario. And you can see the numbers of other firearms that are here in the province. So it's quite a number of firearms. Now here's some of our workload. Last year in 2013, we processed 34,000 new licenses. We dealt with the transfer of 59,000 restricted firearms. We issued 37,000 authorizations to transport, 3,600 authorizations to carry. There were, the Canadian Firearms Safety Course, there was 35,000 courses given and 13,000 for the restricted. And we handled something called Firearms Interest Police, 18,000 of those. Anytime a person is charged with a criminal offense or has some sort of dealings, they come into the mental health system, we get a notification. We call that a FIP. And then we investigate to determine whether that person should still continue to hold a firearms license. I'll talk to you a little bit about our range program. We have, in this province, there's 229 public ranges. We also have 38 private ranges. That's where somebody who owns a large piece of land wants to build their own range, and we'll come out and inspect it according to the Canadian standards. And there's 2,002 shooting clubs in the province. And we set a goal to inspect all those ranges on a biannual basis. And for most of the last 5 years, we've met that. And those ranges are inspected by 10 inspectors who work on contract. Last year, there was 5 reported incidents of injury. Fortunately, no fatalities. Now, I was briefing my boss, the minister, and she said, well, where did these injuries happen? Where'd the most serious injury happen? And I had to say, it happened at the Ontario Police College. Well, it's kind of embarrassing, but the truth, right? We use technology now when we do range inspections, when we're measuring the downrange safety area, the height of the berms and the backstops, to make sure that it's really accurate. And that's really helped improve our program. We found out that many ranges, which we thought had adequate downrange safety areas or backstops that were high enough, weren't actually, in fact, that way. And we work with the ranges and the clubs to either reorient their range or do something to put a fix in to make sure that it conforms to the guidelines. In Ontario, there's 550 firearms businesses that we license, and 500 businesses that sell ammunition only. And businesses include all those things there that you see: retail, wholesale, manufacturing, import, gunsmiths, pawnbrokers, armed guards, and museums. And we also inspect those biannually. We have 17 contract inspectors who go out and inspect these businesses. And every firearm registered to the business is checked. And so we can say that all firearms in businesses are accounted for. And in a few instances where they're not, the police are brought in. It's put on our national data system as missing or whatever it is, and it's investigated by the police. And I'm happy to say I think the firearms businesses in Ontario, of which OFA is one, are among the safest in the country. Like I said, we've had very, very few incidents of missing or unaccounted for firearms. I think we have the most rigorous inspection standards in the country. Since the end of the long gun registry, I've sent my staff out to attend every gun show in Ontario, gun show that we know about. As you know, gun shows in the United States are a major source of illegal firearms, and I want to prevent that from happening here. And so they go out and they check and make sure that all the vendors are safely storing and displaying their firearms, and they have restricted firearms, they have an ATT. As you know, the federal government repealed the gun show regulation requiring the gun show organizers to notify us and law enforcement. I thought that might have been useful, but I wasn't able to persuade the government of that. So last year we attended 58 gun shows, and we found several instances of unsafe display or unauthorized possession of firearms. And on 3 occasions we had to notify the local police, and they came and arrested a few individuals who were illegally selling firearms. But I have to say, I think the gun shows in this province are well run, and they have good security, and the vendors, individuals and businesses are very responsible. The Chief Firearms Office has municipal partners, and we have formal agreements with all the largest police forces so that we work together with them and we share information and records. As you can see, there's a number of municipal police partners there. Now, as Greg mentioned, we're fortunate to have the executive manager of the FSCSO here today with Mr. Dave Wall. The CFO and the FSCSO work hand in glove. As you know, I designate all the firearm safety instructors in Ontario, and the FSCSO administers the delivery of firearm safety training on behalf of the CFO. It's a not-for-profit corporation governed by a board of directors that includes myself. We have approximately 350 designated instructors in Ontario. Unfortunately, I have to tell you there's significant fraudulent activity by instructors in this province. And that includes things like failing to properly teach or examine or do safe handling or just accepting money and no test and no course, nothing. And we're continuing to find that, and I'm attempting to address that. The FSCSO has 2 investigators on contract that where we have reports of people, instructors conducting these fraudulent courses or exams, they go out and investigate them. They're licensed private investigators, and the FSCSO has a private investigator's license. Let me talk to you about our key stakeholders. Of course, the RCMP is the key one because the RCMP pays for the firearms program in Ontario and the rest of the country. There's an annual conference of all the chief firearms officers. We just recently had one so that we can attempt to coordinate how we administer the licensing provisions in Canada so that we try to have one standard for the country. We're not always successful. If I had to sort of rate them, I'd say Alberta is probably the most liberal and Quebec is the most conservative. And Ontario's probably closer to Quebec than Alberta. But we do attempt to, have a consistent application of the law. Since 2008, we've had an annual seminar for all shooting ranges and clubs, and usually have that in Barrie, and it's usually attended by a couple hundred representatives. And it's very useful for sharing information and talking about issues of firearm safety and how clubs and ranges operate. We also have seminars for firearms businesses and the armed guard industry to sort of explain how the Firearms Act applies to them. Let's talk about a couple of our court cases. As I mentioned, I think Ontario and Quebec have probably the most conservative firearms licensing regimes, particularly when it comes to the movement of handguns and certain restricted assault rifles. We issue long-term authorizations to transport, which means it's good for the term of your license, or 2 years, whichever comes first, to shooting club members. And we've denied requests for long-term ATTs to non-club members. Basically, the idea is that if you're a member of a club, we don't want you to have to contact us every time you want to go to your club. So we give you a long-term ATT, so you can go anytime you want. But if you're not a club member, well, our view is that you should ask every time. Now, this has been contested particularly by the Canadian Shooting Sports Association and Tony Bernardo, who think that you should be able to basically drive around with your handgun in your glove box. And that's kind of really what's at issue here. And I think they're attempting to change the law to allow that type of regime. I can tell you the government of Ontario and the Chief Firearms Office does not support that. And we've had several court cases in which individuals have been trying to get this authorization to transport so they can drive around with their handgun in their glove box, and they've been unsuccessful. In fact, we had an appellate court decision this year to that effect. Now, I caused a bit of a controversy in the beginning of 2013, and it came about by having a condition put on ATTs that when you're going to a club as a visitor and you're not a member of another club, you have to be able to produce an invitation to say that you're welcome at the club. You know, a shooting club is like a private golf course. You just can't show up and say, I'm going to come in and start shooting. And so really this came about as a judge who was kind of critical of myself and the Chief Firearms Office for saying, you know, you should be asking for people to produce invitations. So I put that in effect, and Mr. Bernardo did not agree with it. We had a court case, and I'm happy to say that CFO won and Mr. Bernardo lost. We had an unfortunate situation happen in 2012 where the Toronto Police got involved. They arrested a suspect for the illegal possession of a Norinco semi-auto, and the serial number was removed, but the forensics people can recover those now. And the firearm was traced back to a Toronto licensee, and who was subsequently arrested by Toronto Police Service and found in possession of 4 registered restricted firearms. But this individual, he'd only been licensed for a short time. He had acquired 50 restricted firearms, pretty much all semi-automatic handguns. And of course, a subsequent search warrant was done at his house, and those handguns were not found. And what was happening here was this individual was being used by criminal gang members to acquire firearms for them. So here we have a licensed individual who's using his privileges to acquire handguns on behalf of criminals. A second licensee also did something similar. He acquired a number of handguns. These two weren't related. And these firearms started turning up in investigations involving drug trafficking and violent crime. And the Toronto Police Guns and Gangs Unit asked the Firearms Office to take more action to monitor high-volume buyers meeting a certain profile. And we also met with the firearms business where most of these firearms are being acquired to alert them that they should be vigilant in terms of who they're selling their firearms to. This is a kind of a new wrinkle. We hadn't seen this before, and certainly not while I've been the Chief Firearms Officer. So we implemented an enhanced screening initiative, and basically anybody who's has a restricted license left for less than 2 years and is attempting to acquire 5 or more restricted firearms or 2 of the same make and model within a 90-day period, those transfers were held up, and a sergeant supervisor in the Firearms Office was dealt to look into those matters. Now, for those of you who own handguns, you know that when you acquire a handgun, you have to do what's called confirm your purpose for having it. And really, in this country, there's only 2 purposes for having a handgun. One is you're a collector, and the other is you're a shooter. And so if you're a collector and you declare yourself a collector, we ask you to fill out a form and send it back to us. And basically what it says on there is you agree to the Firearms Office, an officer, an inspector, with reasonable notice to come and inspect your firearms. And the other confirmed purpose is target shooter. And then we ask you, what club we verify which club you belong to. And if you tell us you don't belong to a club, what we say is we're going to hold up these transfers until you join a club or you show to us that you actually go to a club. And since we put in place this enhanced screening initiative, a number of applicants have fallen into the sort of our net, and we went and did inspections on them, and all firearms are accounted for. But I think the word has got out now that the Firearms Office is watching people who are inclined to be a pipeline of firearms for organized crime and criminals. Now, we did catch one individual in our net, and he unsuccessfully attempted to acquire 6 restricted firearms through internet firearms business using a compromised license. And how this individual got another person's license was he went onto this website called usefirearms.ca. If you own a firearm, you can advertise it there, and there's transactions between individuals and businesses to individuals and so on. And he offered this firearm, semi-auto handgun, at a ridiculously low price, and of course somebody bid on it. And then he said, well, send me a scanned copy of your firearms license, and then we'll do the transaction, which he did, right? And then, of course, after he got the person's license, he said, I've changed my mind. The individual then canceled the transaction, and he was able to go through our telephone system to change the address on the license. He called down to our central processing site in Miramichi, and they said, well, who are you? Oh, I'm Dave Wall, and I'm changing my address. And he wasn't really Dave Wall, it was the real licensee. He said, I'm changing my address from here to there. And there was an address that the scammer had control of. It wasn't his residence, but it was an address that he controlled. And they ask you a number of questions before they change your address in our computer system. And this individual, I don't know for a fact, he was able to determine where the real licensee's place of birth was. And it wasn't something like Toronto that was easily guessed. I think the licensee's place of birth was Weston, Ontario. Weston is, for many of you might know, used to be a small village in northwest Toronto. Hasn't been a municipality for 50 years or more. But anyways, he was able to do this, and then he started purchasing long guns, because he couldn't get any of the handguns because of our screening initiative. And he managed to purchase 11 assault-type rifles and a large quantity of ammo. Now, one of these transactions didn't go through because there was a problem with the credit card. And so the business that was selling the firearm to this scammer, they contacted the real licensee and said, there's a problem with your credit card. And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. And then finally figured out that this individual had his license and was buying firearms over the internet. And he contacted the Toronto Police Service. And the Toronto Police Service subsequently identified him. He was a 17-year-old male, and they arrested him at a high school in Toronto. And at the time of his arrest, he had in his knapsack a loaded semi-auto pistol with another loaded mag. And there was a search warrant done at his address, and they located all the other firearms, and several of them were loaded, and all were insecure. So we've had to tighten up our system now to stop this type of I call it kind of an internet identity theft type of scam, where you can go on the internet and pretend you're somebody else. And so we've been working with businesses to tighten that up, to make sure that firearms aren't being dealt with illegally over the internet. Now, I just want to talk to you about some potential changes to the Firearms Act. As many of you know, Greg sits on the Federal Firearms Advisory Committee, which advises the federal minister on matters related to firearms. And he may have already spoken to some of these things, but some of the things that the government, I think, is considering is mandatory firearms safety training for all new licensees. And I highly support that, and I commend Bill Blackwell for pushing that. Bill is, I think he's personal friends with the minister and has his ear, and I think that's a good thing. They're also looking at having 10-year firearms licenses, and that's sort of an administrative streamlining, if you will. We've moved to 10-year passports. It just cuts down on the amount of paperwork. There's also discussion about changing all possession-only licenses to PALs, and I think the idea being that if you're not a public safety risk to own a firearm, you're probably not a public safety risk to acquire one. The other one, which I mentioned, which I don't support, is having an authorization to transport that allows you to have your handgun in your glove box or just drive around with it all the time. Another thing that's on the table is having increased oversight of Canadian firearms safety course instructors. And I give Bill Blackwell and others credit for advancing that. One of the things that this government seems to like is mandatory sentences and mandatory things, and I think they're looking at having mandatory firearms prohibitions for all violent crimes instead of just some discretionary. And the other one is allowing the police to transfer firearms that come into their possession to individuals, say Canadian Firearms Safety Course instructors. About 3 years ago, a new piece of legislation was put into place. It was called the Public Agent Regulation, and it really was driven by the UN Treaty on Small Arms Control. And the intention of it was to minimize or to eradicate the movement of firearms from government organizations to individuals and other non-government organizations. And I think that's probably not a bad thing, but it sort of ties the hands of the police if they want to, allow like safety instructors access to firearms to carry out safety training. So those are some of the changes. The last thing I want to do is recognize your president here, Bill Blackwell. And this is a photo that Bill sent me. And now some of you have probably been to the east. You can kind of see what he's got on there is some regalia. But that was the best photo you could send to me. And Bill has been an excellent supporter of firearms safety training in this province, and he's been a leader. He's really assisted me at the CFO. Whenever I need firearms safety training done for firearms officers, I call on Bill Blackwell. He's the best. So, Bill, would you mind coming up here? So, I just want to say to you all, I'm conferring the honor of Honorary Firearms Officer on Bill Blackwell, and with that, he gets a badge saying Honorary Firearms Officer. Now, you show that badge at Tim Hortons, you get a medium coffee, no cream.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's awesome.
So Bill, I just want to say thank you for your ongoing support. I really appreciate everything you do, and thank you for inviting me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I'll be around, or if I'm here to answer questions if anybody has them.
Can I take away his license right off the bat?
He said it was an honorary badge, Bill. Nice try. It might work at Tim's, but it's not working here. If there's any questions for Superintendent Wyatt, please come up to the microphones. He's got a few minutes here to answer a few.
Yes, my name is Kevin Vardy. I'm with the Georgian Bay Get Outdoors Club. And I want to give you guys a little bit of credit because Kiri in your office does an awesome job with the transfers and stuff. She's a really good girl to deal with. But what I do have a problem with is the time it takes for the young people that have a minor's permit when they turn 15 to get their regular firearms license, because we've had lots of instances in our area where they miss a whole hunting season just because they can't have possession of a firearm anymore, even with a mentor. There's got to be some way to cut that time frame down, because like 4 months is just it's too much. And these are kids that have had a firearms license basically already for 2 or 3 years, and I just don't see the need for it.
I am in agreement with you, and I think part of the problem is our system is somewhat bureaucratic, and I don't agree with that either. I'd like a smooth transition from minor's license to PAL, and I guess what I have to say is, plan in advance, give us lots of time. I had to deal with one individual. His father called and said, "Look, we've got a moose tag, and I bought him this beautiful new rifle, and cost a couple $1,000, and they're going to go to Thunder Bay." And he said, "Can you pull his license application out of the pile that's sitting at the central processing site in Miramichi?" And you have to appreciate it's a little like a sausage factory there, and now you're asking me to find one sausage, right? It's very, very difficult. I sympathize, but I don't know how much I can do.
I know that we've talked to the people, actually. We talked to them at the Sportsman Show, and one end of the system points their fingers at the Firearms Office. The Firearms Office points their fingers back at Miramichi. So how do you do it?
I don't like doing the finger pointing thing. We're all in the same organization as fire. It's something we don't do really well, and all I can say is I'll try and work on it as best I can.
Perfect.
I'm pretty much past my best before date as Chief Firearms Officer, so I might not work on it quite so hard. And I may have to leave that to my successor.
Perfect, thank you.
Felix?
In the same vein, Inspector, Felix Barbetti from Fonthill, and the question is, have you noticed, or is there a discernible backlog in issuing FACs to long gun and newly acquired long gun willing hunters?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say there is a fairly significant backlog. And the other gentleman there, so I'm going to tell you, it's not me. It's not at the firearms license where the backlog exists, right? And the RCMP know there's a backlog at the front end where all the paperwork is coming in, and they know they have to do something about it, and they tell me they're working on it. I do try to be responsive to, like if somebody calls and says, look, my license has been in the system for months, right? Can you help me? I'll do whatever I can to help you.
On the flip side, if I'm allowed a second question, has there been an increase in decertifications of PALs?
I think the short answer is no. No, there hasn't been a significant increase in the revoking of firearms licenses.
Thank you.
Lori Flanzer from Oshawa. I just have a question regarding the restricted firearms license. I've heard a lot of potential restricted owners say, you know, I want to take the course and I want to get into handguns, but the ranges are all full and backlogged. And I'm wondering if there is a way that if you have your long gun license and you get your restricted license, perhaps you can get, like you're restricted to one handgun that you don't have to be part of the clubs, because there aren't enough clubs for everybody that wants to get involved.
No, I sympathize with you. The club membership, especially in the GTA area,
Yeah.
has really taken off, and it's tough to join. Many have said
Yeah.
We have waiting lists.
Yeah.
But you can still go to a shooting club as a guest. And
But can you own your own at that point?
yes, you can.
Can you?
Yep.
Okay.
You have to say what your purpose is for. And if you say you're a target shooter, we're going to be asking you for evidence of where, you know, like even as going to a range as a guest. Because if you say you're a target shooter and you never go to a range, well, are you really a target shooter, right? Maybe what you should say is, I'm a collector. And then you can still get an ATT to go to a range as a guest.
Okay.
And you can change your purpose. If suddenly you start off as a collector, you can say, okay, I've now been accepted at a club, I'm now a target shooter.
Okay, so you're recommending then to go in as a collector?
That's one option
to
for
start
you.
off, maybe while you're on a waiting list to get into somewhere?
You don't have to be a member of a club to be have the purpose of a target shooter,
Yeah?
but you have to go sometime to a club during the course of your license.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Jerry?
Morning, my name's Jerry Harmeyer. I'm from MacTier, and I'm a firearm safety course instructor. Quite often I get asked questions with regards to target practicing in the back 40 of my 100-acre farm. How do you view that sand pit from your standpoint? Is it a firing range, or you inspect it as a firing range if a person has an accident, that type of thing? I get that question a fair bit. I know what I answer, but I'd like to hear yours for the group. Thank you.
Jerry, the Firearms Act says that a firearms range is someplace that is structured and regular. So if you're using your firearm in a structured way, say you're building a backstop, that's now looking like a range. And if you're shooting like on a regular basis, say you're out there every week on the weekend, right, shooting, you're effectively, in the eyes of the law, you have a range, and you need to have range approval. If you're once, like before hunting season, going out in your back 40 and sighting in your rifle, as long as you're doing that safely, that the law allows that. But if you're doing it on an ongoing basis, and particularly if you're starting to build backstops and stuff like that, then you need to get range approval from us. And 40 individuals in this province have their own approved ranges. Does that answer your question? Okay.
If there are no further questions, I want to take the opportunity to thank Chris for coming today, thank Dave Wall also for accompanying him, but to thank Chris for being here today. Obviously, we at OFH, we have a lot of interaction with the CFO, both with Chris himself and with several members of his staff. Bill Blackwell and I, as Chris suggested, meet with them on several occasions during the year. It's a good working relationship. We don't always agree on all issues, as he's indicated, but it's one that we deal with respect, and we appreciate the time that he took to be here this morning. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks very much.